So, welcome a bit of a different episode today where I'm not going to be reading from my teleprompter. I'm going to be reading testimonials from people in my membership about the positive experiences that they've had in therapy. And why I wanted to do an episode sort of like this is there's often so much discussion out there about having a poor fit with a therapist or even a damaging therapist, or if you're new to therapy or you've never really gone, you don't really sort of know what to expect. So I have this goofy analogy, and it's what I wanted to talk about in this episode about people experiencing good therapy with good therapists. So I have this analogy, what I tell people about therapists is that sort of finding one is a lot like the experience of finding a good mechanic. That a good mechanic kind of knows what's going on in your car, that complex machine that's going on there, so they have some like authority over that. But I think most importantly that a good mechanic, sort of like a therapist, knows how to manage your emotions and knows how to be honest with you, and also knows how to be compassionate in the way that you've just been hit with a $1,500 new transmission fee, and they're able to sort of not only like that you trust them, that you know what's kind of going on, you trust them that they can kind of fix it, but also that they see you in the struggle of just keeping yourself on the road. I know that that's a weird analogy, but I really more mean it from that in the old school days when people had a good mechanic, like a therapist, they're like, I love this person. This is my person for life. Because why? Because they trust the mechanic and the mechanic can see them and really be straight with them and be honest with them. A little bit of a different episode today where I'm not reading from a teleprompter. I'm actually going to be reading from testimonials that I've asked people in my membership to. I asked them, I've kind of put out this kind of beacon of like, tell me some good things about therapy that you've experienced, because in many ways, in the zeitgeist of the mental health, the Instagram, the TikTok, all over the place, is we talk a lot about therapists not getting family estrangement. We talk about a lot of therapists not being a good fit. We talk a lot about therapists not getting trauma, all kinds of kind of problems. And another weird analogy is if I were to go to a general practitioner for my physical health, my medical health, I would assume that everyone knows how to diagnose diabetes and knows how to treat it in a good enough way, and it's pretty much formulaic. Therapists are not like that. They really come to this kind of thing where hopefully they're adequately kind of trained in a model of therapy that works for them. But what I'm getting at is you can't go to every therapist and experience the same kind of hopefully general good enough treatment. And this bothers me about the world and sort of psychotherapy and I know that the medical world is definitely a problem as well. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we don't talk enough about the goodness that comes from therapy. I've had 3 therapists. They've all been amazing. I've been very, very lucky in that way. The first one, my mentor, Amanda Curtin, changed my life. She inspired me. I got inspired to become a therapist. I was an absolute total mess. And she was just this warm, compassionate, guiding force in my life that it was like I was sort of being mothered by this woman in a very boundaried way, but she could see that things were not right and things were really sort of in my childhood, as she could sort of see all of it. But she knew how to make someone feel safe, and she knew how to make someone feel seen, which is a theme in these testimonials that you'll sort of see in a minute. So that's the reason for this episode. I asked my members to write into me and really sort of, if they could sort of celebrate and talk about a therapist that helped them, why specifically. And I love their responses. So, and you'll notice a theme. The first one I'm calling compassionate, curious, and guiding about speed, which I really love in this one. So it's just 2 paragraphs. Here's a testimonial. My therapist is a somatic experiencing practitioner and uses somatic experiencing to support me process my trauma. She also incorporates some inner child and parts work and seems to have unconditional compassion towards me. Side note, that can freak us out when someone has that much compassion for us. It freaked me out. I'll continue. She says, I have shared a lot of extremely difficult things with her, and what has helped me the most is her being curious and really trying to understand. So she goes on to say, I have also felt like healing has to be a quick process, but she has helped me slow down and realize that feeling emotions from trauma flashbacks is manageable and safe when done in a slow and paced way. She has a really safe presence, which helps me feel like I'm not alone in exploring really intense emotions. That's rare for me, and I appreciate her a lot. I thought that that was beautiful, but there's something I really want to focus on. I think as childhood trauma survivors, we do want therapy to be kind of speed and quick, to be quick about it. I think a lot of us kind of approach it as just like, oh, just get the ick out, just like vomit up the thing and then move on, or there's some kind of emergent feeling. And it's true, we do want to get to the root of these things, but there's also sort of, I think what I love about this so much is we're really talking about the therapist is helping you have a process and slowing down, and there's no such thing as a good process in a toxic family system. You're supposed to get it out quickly, what you want to communicate. You're supposed to be amazing at violin. You're not supposed to have any emotions about what's going on about you. It's like an anti-process environment. And what I love about this testimonial is you're with a therapist who's encouraging you to slow down, and there's really no race to be had about getting it all done and getting it out. But a lot of childhood trauma survivors, including myself, we're just so freaked out about what happened to us and talking about it. We just kind of want to get it done. But that's not allowing ourselves to have a process either. But I also want to kind of talk a little bit about, I experienced all that with my therapist, but we were also doing a childhood trauma group together with 7 other people. And imagine if the compassion that this person sort of felt from just one therapist, imagine if that compassion was going, if you were in a group with other people that were supporting you and seeing you and being able to allow you to have a process for the first time. And I think that's what I loved about good group therapy is we get feedback from our peers as well as a therapist. Like another kind of thing about therapy, and I talk about this in my book that I'm writing, is that therapists can hold a lot of power over us. And I'm not trying to saying they're all abusing that power or whatever. To my first therapist, I assumed that they were like this angelical being that just like went home and meditated and ate a couple ginkgo leaves and just went back to it the next day. And I felt so crappy about myself that I will elevate a therapist. So there's kind of a power dynamic there. And I think a good therapist, they're not disclosing their story or that, but they just make you feel included and equalized. And I call group psychotherapy the great equalizer in this way. So sorry if that was a tangent, but I would just love for this person to also, for everybody to experience in a community of people that you get the same kind of love and compassion and curiosity from other people, not just a therapist. Because it's almost like therapist and client relationships are a bit siloed, where we want to be learning from therapy about, I think, to have more community. So I really love that testimonial. Let's go on to the next one, which I just titled, Really Felt Seen. So this person writes in, I have had many counselors in my life, but one stood out above the rest. It wasn't anything that we ever talked about or anything specific that he ever said. What helped me to feel safe was more about what he didn't say and he didn't do compared to other counselors. I love this. He didn't jump in immediately to try to fix me, give me advice, educate me, or change my perspective. Rather, I had a good experience of a counselor who listened and didn't judge. Beautiful. They go on to say, after I spoke at the beginning of the session, he would take a silent pause before responding to turn it over in his mind. That much silence might freak me out a little bit, but I know what's kind of going on here, and it's really good. Then he would repeat back to me a summary of what I just said, and then let me know that he understood and was listening. Rather than telling me what he thought I should do or offering a lot of skills or opinions right away, he would first take the time to ask me what I thought was the right step to take care of myself. And this encouraged me to build up my sense of autonomy. Love that so much. I worked with this counselor longer than I worked with any of the other counselors, and I came to appreciate the consistency and being able to let my guard down. Huge. That's the experience that I had with Amanda, was just like this disarming kind of a thing just by being in her presence. I also deeply valued having that counselor who listened and didn't judge while I was navigating the early stages of lowering contact with my family of origin. It really helped me to not have to go through that alone and not having made it harder than it already was. They're touching on this huge thing that I really hate about psychotherapy is when people need distance from abusive people, And a therapist kind of upfront encourages there to be more working with an abusive person rather than taking care of themselves around it. So I hear that a lot. I haven't experienced that myself. I've experienced it outside my life, kind of a thing, but like huge props to this therapist. And my thoughts on this was being able to lower our guard. And I know what they really mean by that is I was so keyed up in therapy as what the therapist might be thinking of me. That was so triggering to me, but I really like this person's account of their therapist was someone that they never felt judged by. And it went from like this, my experience like that in that dynamic, it went from like intense discomfort to looking forward to seeing the therapist. That's what I think is the mark of a good therapist. It's always a bit freaky, to be blunt, about starting therapy because it's so intimate and you can feel exposing and that kind of a thing. But I find that the ones that are really sort of safe and good at what they do is you look forward to seeing them. And that, going to get deep here, is that what I've learned from Amanda is I think a good therapist is like a good parent. And so many of us, this is probably the triggering issue in a lot of this stuff, is my parents were an ordeal to get through, and I had to hide big parts of myself with that. And I took that initially to therapy, as we all do. That the person's going to judge us, or it's going to be an ordeal that we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to have to answer a lot of questions or navigate a lot of like just sort of like bad energy or whatever. It's like we're projecting the abusive parent onto a therapist in that way. But I love it when you crest over that and you get to know the therapist enough. There's enough sessions that you look forward to seeing them the same way a 5-year-old treats the parent as like a safe home base when they are actually safe. I'm not sort of saying that therapists are going to take us home and tuck us in. And I'm not talking about crossing boundaries in that way. I'm just kind of saying to my inner child, it's a beautiful thing to have a client come see you and feel safe to you. And like, I've been mulling this over. I couldn't wait to sort of talk about this with you. Like, that's a gift. That is really a huge thing. So I really appreciate this person's testimonial. So if you're a regular listener here, you probably know that healing childhood trauma isn't just about talking. In fact, you might have been working with a therapist and just be frustrated by the talking and going nowhere. I think healing is really about specifics and a roadmap. I created a healing membership that skips that talking. In that membership, we currently have over about 1,000 members who are working to move past the vague kind of stuck points of toxic family systems, the places that they're stuck in around their family. And I've built life-changing tools. These tools are what changed my life. This is the work that I did in the 90s with Amanda Curtin and inspired by her work. And I added new ones like reparenting the inner child. There's a genogram course. There's navigating family cutoffs. And these are all turned into very specific, helpful coursework. You can bring them into therapy or you can work with them on your own, either way. Beyond the coursework, you get now well over 100 deep dive weekly based journal prompts that I put out every week. In addition to that, I do a twice monthly live Q&A, which are Zoom meetings, not webinars, so it's intimate. It's a real community that was hosted on the Circle platform, if you're familiar with Circle, where you can do the deep work at your own pace. And with Circle, everything is in one place. The Zoom links are all there, the courses, the calendars, the forums. There's a blog that I host there. It's actually a lot of fun. This isn't group or individual one-to-one therapy or a replacement for therapy. I want to be clear about that. It's really a perfect bridge for those who want to bring deeper insights into their sessions, if you're in therapy right now, or for anyone who needs a structured place to start around working on your childhood trauma. Or if you don't have access to any of this kind of help, whether it's therapy or whatever, it's a great place to start. You could try it for a month and explore all of our tiers that are catered to what you need. You could check it out at patrickteahan.com/membership, and I hope to see you there. Couple things. I love the fact that this therapist is male. It is a female-dominated field, so anytime I hear that a man is sort of safe for somebody, it just makes my heart sing. My favorite thing on the planet is seeing a dad out with his kids and his kids enjoying time with dad. That just makes my heart, I become a mess inside. I really love that. And I love that this therapist helped you go with no contact, without that judgment. That therapist that you're describing is really in tune with working with the trauma originating in family, because they also knew to not, insert any kind of weirdness about there. In a way, like, the therapist is more in tune with the pain that you're already in, instead of suggesting something that's going to make you feel more shamed about a very kind of shame-based situation. So I really love that. Let's see, just looking at my notes. Yes, this one is really powerful, and specifically about what the therapist sort of said. And I highlighted this quote from this testimonial. People don't get trauma responses from good enough parenting. That is what the therapist said to this member of mine in my membership. So here it goes. I feel like I got lucky with an experienced therapist. He's helped, another male therapist, he's helped me over a lot of the years. Here are some highlights of the things he said and we've done that had an impact on me. From that major quote that I referenced, people don't get trauma responses from good enough parenting. This helped me realize that my trauma symptoms were proof that it was really that bad. He asked me early in our time together how my body reacted to having to be in their presence, there probably being their family, or get a call or a text from family. And it was one of the markers that suggested I had PTSD from my childhood. Another quote from the therapist is when they said, yelling is verbal abuse. I was minimizing what I had endured. First of all, that is so common when we show up and we're just minimizing our own story. And it is a good therapist that kind of gently brings that to light with us. So I was minimizing what I had endured, and he had to repeat phrases many times over many sessions for me to start to sink in. Yelling and verbal abuse was so normalized and common in my family of origin that I had to learn not to yell in college. Super embarrassing. I know exactly what you mean by that. We're set up for these toxic family behaviors. Realizing that yelling was abuse helped me understand just how much I was subject to it. So the props to the therapist of just really being able to be consistent and help somebody kind of, it's like unbrainwashing from the toxic family system. It was basically daily for years, and this was only one aspect of the abuse and neglect. No wonder I ended up with CPTSD from my childhood. And their last quote, I love this too, is, what sensations are you experiencing in your body? He does somatic talk therapy with me, and it always, always, always directs me to my bodily sensations. I love it. It gets us out of our head. Childhood trauma survivors, we're living in our head, and a lot of the treatment is about coming back into our body. A huge part of healing for me is reconnecting with my bodily sensations and learning what they actually mean. I was gaslit so much as a child that it miscalibrated my nervous system. That's very well said. I had to recalibrate the meaning of my sensations as an adult because they don't mean what I was taught that they meant. He has also been great at explaining psychotherapy terms, explaining the trauma rain science to me, and going over questions I have from books I've read. So he sounds like he's a really great resource for this person. His willingness to be patient and explain things so that I can understand how they relate to me and my experiences has melted away a lot of shame for me. That is beautiful. And I love this. At the end, they kind of plug something that was helpful to them. They say, and I have to mention deep brain reorienting. They list a website, deepbrainreorienting.com. I'm not affiliated. I'm not plugging anything. This is just what was in the person's heart, that a resource they wanted to share. DBR has been the most effective treatment for me. It's disarmed so many of my triggers that I've gained a lot of my agency back. I no longer get dysregulated like I used to. It was so bad at one point that I could barely function. Totally relate to that. I would almost pass out from dysregulation many times a day, and my body would be flooded with overwhelming sensations. DBR disarmed my triggers, and I no longer get these huge, overwhelming floods of sensation. It's a huge game changer, and I wish I was available to everyone with trauma. I've never heard of it. I will sort of check it out, and I'm glad that you voiced that. What I really loved about this person's experience was that the yelling is about that people don't get childhood trauma from good enough parenting, and what are you feeling in your body is the work of the therapist, sort of like being consistent. It's a lot. It's very repetitive, because when we're working with childhood trauma, there's so much internalized things, So, and I was just talking to somebody else earlier about this, of even the phrase, your parents did the best that you could, what I mean about some kind of brainwashing type stuff or our conditioning is we may have grown up with parents who indirectly or directly had that narrative going on themselves, meaning that we were also fed these narratives. And then when we get to therapy, we repeat them like, oh, yelling is an abuse. Oh, yelling is abuse. And what I'm getting at is, like we grow up in a family of screamers and yellers, emotional abuse and physical abuse. And then I feel like the toxic kind of parent will tell on themselves and kind of say like, oh, it's not that bad. All families do this. So it's a bit like they kind of know it's an issue, but they create a narrative on it that we absorb. And then when we get to therapy, it really is the mark of a good therapist who can really zero in on that stuff and help us kind of like reframe it. In the first chapter of the book that I'm writing about my experience with Amanda, when I was 20 years old, I remember the first thing that she said to me was when I talked about, I grew up with a father who had narcissistic personality disorder, and I grew up with a mom who has mental health issues too, but namely alcoholism. She would drive around drunk with us in the car. And when I explained that to, it was like one of the first sessions, when I explained that to Amanda, I remember Amanda specifically kind of saying, oh boy, that's not okay. And she wasn't like shaming me for not knowing. She was mirroring and validating and also picking up on it that I would talk about this thing and almost like I would minimize that my mother would drink and drive with children in the car. And Amanda picked up on that. But she did it in a way that was like, reframing it for me, just even validating, like, I'll never forget that. Boy, that's not okay, which was new to me. It was shocking. I kind of knew that drunk driving was kind of not okay, but like there were so many narratives that my mother would, oh, don't worry about it, or what else, you know what I mean, or whatever she would kind of say. So hopefully this is making sense. But if you're listening out there, ask yourself or leave a comment somewhere about what are the narratives that you absorbed, like this person is elegantly kind of talking about, like yelling is okay, even to the point that we start to yell at people. They mentioned they were maybe doing that in college. Really powerful stuff. So many of you have taken the ACE study test or the Adverse Childhood Trauma Experiences study test. While helpful in some ways, it's really a rough measure of childhood trauma, which is a common critique of it. It's like, it's not enough. It doesn't measure what is going on with the adults in a child's life. The ACE study is more about the results of the trauma that kids experience, about what is going on in the system that the child is growing up in. It doesn't complete a whole story. It doesn't measure the dynamics of family relationships like marriages, siblings, and parent-child relationships like attachment. When caregivers are abusive, it affects the whole system that the child is growing up in, and we tend to not measure that child's environment. So I actually came up with a clinical assessment that measures unsafe, toxic environments. This assessment was recently published in the Journal of Family Trauma, Child Custody, and Child Development in June of 2025. This assessment can help you get a sense of measuring the toxicity that you grew up in from a family of origin childhood trauma perspective. Even if you know already that something was up, now it is measurable with this test. The questions are also highly reflective, and I actually think the questions are more important than your score at the end of the day, because those questions are really great things to bring into your reflective work or to bring into therapy. You can easily find and take this test at toxicfamilytest.com. To close this up is, I do want to sort of say that Amanda was very skilled as a therapist, but in so many ways, her training or the model that she was doing, which was really cool and powerful, didn't matter as much as her compassion, as her ability to really sort of understand the person sitting across from them. And really what I really loved about Amanda is that she would be able to talk to your inner child without making you feel immature or infantilizing or something like that. She really sort of would see her clients, and it is that she really became quickly safe for a lot of people, which I think is the whole, like for all of the therapists. What we got? We got two, I'm assuming the first one was female, and then two male therapists. Just think about the safety of the quality of these therapists. They're not judging. They're not jumping into fix. They're not minimizing your feelings. They're not minimizing your family in a way. And also to sort of say, like, the work that they're doing is incredibly hard because they're sitting with you with your pain and holding it sort of with you in a way just by talking about it in the room. And they're also holding the ways that clients might feel like they're not trustworthy until they are. So much is going on. I really feel like a good therapist has a gift for this kind of stuff. And if anyone's listening, wanting to become a therapist, or you're a new therapist kind of out there, I think the main message is to really understand the person's shoes that they've really kind of walked in, and your ability or have a gift of putting yourself in those shoes. And I really think it also comes down to kind of reading the room in a way that I kind of wish that more therapists, I know that there's a lot of gifted, amazing therapists out there, but I kind of have a love-hate with therapy in the ways that many therapists might be green and not be very skilled or not be really kind of got their sea legs yet. But there's just some people that were kind of born to do this work, and they're really great, and I love that. And when you really think about it, it's sort of like, how miraculous is it for people to find a safe person in therapy, and where most of our lives is, whether we're partners or whatever, we've never had a fully safe kind of person to bounce things off of or share things with. I really think we should be getting that from our family of origin. So some final thoughts. I also want to add a couple things that Amanda sort of said that were massively helpful to me. Like I mentioned, the "oh boy, that's not okay" with my mother's drunk driving, that was huge. But another, and I talk about this in the book, I named this specifically. She also said to me one day when I was really struggling with an abusive boss, I waited tables forever, and in this fine dining restaurant, there was this notoriously abusive maitre d', this older kind of white guy who would just verbally abuse you when you made a mistake or whatever. And he did that to me one night, and I finally stood up to him. But what got me there was, I would go to Amanda with these triggers because this guy was really abusive and really like my parents. And she said, don't sweat those who are not in your inner circle. And what she meant by that, she said that gently. She was sort of saying, you don't have to give somebody so much of your headspace if they're not a deep friend, a deep partner, or a family member. And that really blew my mind, because hopefully you identify with this. As childhood trauma survivors, we have really porous mental boundaries, where we feel the need to explain ourselves to the moody barista. We feel like we need to explain ourselves to a coworker who is kind of a passing person in our life, especially when there's conflict. So this toxic boss, it's understandable, they really get into our heads, but that really solved something for me, because she was kind of saying, you can reserve conflict for those that you respect and you love. Anybody else, is you don't have to be that triggered about them. And it actually helped me be less triggered about them, which is still tricky. We're going to be triggered by a toxic boss. It didn't poof go away, but it really kind of made me sort of see like, oh, you're just a passing jackass in my life. You're not my dad or a partner or whatever. So that was a very helpful thing. And another helpful thing that Amanda sort of said to me was, you had nothing to work with when we would talk about my family. And in context where I would feel ashamed that I couldn't rise above my family system or get good grades or get through to a parent about the drinking and driving or get through to them on anything. And this idea you had nothing to work with is also in a way that as adults, we can find partnerships and people in our lives where we replicate somebody where we have nothing to work with. So in other words, this phrase, you had nothing to work with, took all of that shame and guilting pressure that we put upon ourselves about, say, getting through to that narcissistic parent, or feeling bad that we weren't better in high school, or we feel bad that we have feelings about a family member sabotaging our wedding. And many childhood traumas are like, how could I have prevented this? How could I have met it at the past? You know, you had nothing to work with normalizes so much. So hopefully you can take these with you in a way. And I'm just, I love this kind of conversation with myself it reminds me about how inspiring therapists and therapy can be in general. And if you've never gone to therapy, it is kind of scary, but I would tell people my general advice is to sort of shop around. You're going to need this kind of connection with someone who gets you and you feel comfortable with them. So, but again, there's also other problems with therapy about its availability. If it's affordable, there's all kinds of Again, I have a love-hate relationship with my own field. But if therapy isn't affordable to you, or you're not really ready for that, or you are in therapy, but it's just not hitting the childhood trauma component, is I do run a membership where that membership is a series of courses on childhood trauma, like the Genogram, the Family Rules, Children's Bill of Rights, journal prompts, masterclass videos that go out. My favorite component about it, and this is an option or not, is the live Q&As where we get together as a community and people submit their questions. So that's a really great place to be, kind of more immersed in childhood trauma work, especially if you're not quite ready for therapy, or if it's not exactly accessible or affordable to you as a yet. And what I hear from testimonials and people, that it better sets people up to have a better therapy experience, or it better sets people up to be able to go to therapy with a greater understanding, or these things aren't so activating to kind of talk about. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I really appreciate those who submitted the testimonials. As always, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. And may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.